Greetings, friends, and welcome back to the Musings from the Mount podcast, where we explore the depths of human experience and spiritual wisdom. I'm your host, Joseph Carenza. In today's episode, we dive into the transformative power of joy. How can we cultivate joy in a world often overshadowed by challenges? Is joy merely an emotion or something far more profound? Join us as we unravel the mysteries of joy as a state of being, a spiritual practice, and a force for positive change. We hope you like the podcast. And if you do enjoy the podcast, please consider going to meditationmount.org and donating. Your donation helps us to bring you this podcast and all the other programs the Mount produces both today and in the future. We're incredibly grateful and honored by your support. Okay, now back to the podcast. When you suggested joy for a topic, it really lit up my brain in a bunch of different ways. And I think among all the, I don't want to say emotion, but maybe states of being, joy is one that holds a particular fondness for me because it's not just a state of being. It's not just an emotion. It is, for me, it's the most rebellious state, because a sense of joy, you're almost rebelling against sometimes the darkness of the world or the pain and suffering of the world. That being in a state of joy is a state of rebellion, which of course appeals to me as a young rebel growing up. But it's also subversive and transformative, and there's something to it. Like you're refusing to be controlled because you're going to be in a state of joy regardless of your external circumstances. Joy is originated and seated within you. And I think that's, for me, the appeal of the concept of joy, especially sometimes we focus on some heavy topics, and you just think joy is a lightweight, but it's not. The concept of joy is a heavy hitter. It's a heavyweight.
I love the way that you named it as a state of being.
Mm-hmm.
So joy is a state of being. It's not a concept. It's not just an emotion.
Mm-hmm.
It's like the nuclear heart of the sun,
Mm-hmm.
the atomic heart of the sun that is just burning and radiating.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that it radiates, the inner spiritual sun, is joy.
Yeah.
I was thinking of this morning when I woke up, and I thought, well, how would I describe joy? And there are many ways, but one is like joy is the effervescence of a fully engaged life, of a life that is fully lived, but also lived in service or lived as part of something greater. Because joy is an expansion. As you said, it's subversive, but it's also supraversive. It pervades everything. It infuses and suffuses everything. Joy permeates because joy lives at the heart of everything. It's just like the Word gave birth to light, as we know from the Bible. Beingness of the Creator gave birth to joy, gave birth to beauty, gave birth to goodness, gave birth to truth. I think it's in that same frame. So I love the way you named it as a state of being, because one of the things that always perplexes people, and the question I've been asked several times, and I've asked myself, how can I truly be joyful while I'm surrounded by so much suffering in the world? Because at the moment, if you look around, whether it's what's been happening in the UK with the riots there, racially motivated or prompted riots, it's all the things happening in the world. These are jagged and jarring scenes of suffering, and they fill our collective field of vision, and they bring to the surface any unresolved issues we have around them. And sometimes they can bring despair and despondency. And therefore, it's like, what right have you got to be joyful when the world is this bad? It's like saying to the sun, how dare you shine in the sky when there are so many dark and ominous clouds around? And then the sun basically says, excuse me, I'm the way that you lift those clouds.
Right.
I'm not antithetical. I'm not in opposition. Joy is not the opposite to suffering. Joy is the gold that comes through the alchemical process of suffering, we talked about this before, Joy. Joy and wisdom are born out of pain and suffering, because that is the earth experience. Because the earth can be a very dark and ominous and foreboding place until we light it with the lamp of the inner sun, which is this joyful exuberance.
Yeah, it sort of transcends that duality of pain and pleasure.
Yes, exactly.
It's the triangle point,
Well, and if you're going to go back to the ageless wisdom teaching, there was a differentiation made there. It was always said that bliss has to do with spirit, joy with the soul, and happiness with the personality. That doesn't mean it's lower when we say the personality. It's what we talked about when we talked about gross domestic product and gross domestic happiness.
Right.
So, or how do you measure the wealth of a country? By its level of happiness. This is what the King of Bhutan did many years ago. He just decided to measure the state of their economy or their welfare by the state of happiness.
Right.
So happiness is that we all feel good about being alive. The soul experiences joy because it understands that it is part of something greater. It's an agency for life, and therefore it's in touch with something deep. In the spiritual teachings, bliss is always synonymous with spirit, because when you reach samadhi and reach a state of bliss, there is nothing pulling from the earth. It goes beyond joy. Bliss is this state of absolute refined oneness with life. And therefore, you meld and merge into life, and it's bliss. Bliss is when you are at one.
Right.
Joy is when you're experiencing the oneness, but bliss is like you're reabsorbed into this field, this deep field of life. However, joy is such an important factor, because without joy, things don't happen. Without the sun, the crops don't grow. We enter times of sadness and despondency. So it's a very important thing to look at, and I'm glad we're approaching it, because when I look around the world, there's not much overt joy. There's, you see some joy at the Olympics where people have succeeded in winning and getting gold. So once again, you're given gold as merit for your achievement.
Yeah.
But joy is gold. It really is. So I'm just wondering, what else, when you think of joy, does it bring up for you? Joy?
Well, for me, I think the concept of joy as a spiritual practice is particularly interesting to me.
Yes.
Because, we often think about, especially people who are on this path, people probably who are inclined to listen to this podcast, they have practices, whether they're spiritual or meditative or mindfulness practices. But we don't necessarily think of, at least I didn't think until I started really getting into this idea of joy as a spiritual practice. Like, this is something that you actually have to cultivate and practice the same way that you would practice scales if you were a musician,
Right. It's not like so you have a piece of chocolate and you feel good.
Right. No, it's not that.
It's not the result of doing something. It is in its own right.
Yeah. Yeah.
The presence of life.
Almost like the practice is really cultivating the space for joy to exist.
Thank you. I think that's it. Joy is the radiant expression of life when you create a space for it to enter. And that space, we've talked about this several times over the past couple of years, is the gratitude, for instance. When you're grateful for life, it isn't just saying, oh, thank you for all the hardships. Grateful means that I'm part of something greater. My gosh, I am grateful to be alive. And therefore, there's like this rush of, oh, wow, of joy, because you realize you're part of this enormous mystery, this unfathomable mystery that the brain can't figure out, the heart can sense. So I agree with you. And in fact, I'd like to go and look at how joy is described in the Ageless Wisdom teachings. We can go look at it, what Agni Yoga says, but also we have Roberto Assagioli, our inspiration behind Meditation Mount, who was a student of the Tibetan master DK, And so he learnt about joy through being part of that practice and that process of unfolding. But a couple of years ago, I think I wrote an essay on joy and suffering. And one of the things I want to quote from, I just found this paragraph. So the pain of the past lingers in the present as a dark foreboding cloud that obscures the light of the soul, creating a sense of ceaseless suffering and hopelessness that dampens our creative spirit. The unshakable faith and expectancy of a brighter future, sensed deep inside the heart, shines in the present as radiant joy. It liberates the energy of the soul and allows us to show up as a powerful force for good and an active agent of positive change in the world. So it shines in the present as radiant joy. It isn't a result of something we do. It's exactly as you said, Joey. Our state of being opens a portal for joy to enter. Joy is omnipresent. It's just like love is omnipresent.
Yeah, for me, I definitely have, when I'm truly connected to Source, when I have that moment where I'm seated and I feel the connection to the divine, the feeling for me is joy. It doesn't, and it's not necessarily like, it's not bliss, but it's more of like a seated sense of space and foundation. There's also closely tied to when I say you are, but I mean like when I feel aligned with my actual purpose.
Right.
It doesn't matter. And in that sense, it doesn't matter if it's going hard or it's difficult or, but there is that joy in that work, the great work,
It's what we've mentioned before, is that when you have a deeper sense of meaning and belonging in your life, i.e. you're living on purpose.
Right.
I am living on purpose, and purpose is living in me.
Yeah.
It's joy because you're doing who you are, not what you're supposed to be doing. You're doing who you are. Yeah. You're being who you are.
Yeah.
Assagioli also talks about spiritual joy. So it's what you've just named. And this is what he said. He said, spiritual joy is a duty towards others. At every step on our way, we should help our brothers and sisters to share in the treasures which we have discovered, in the benefits which have been showered upon us, in the powers which are developing in us. And he goes on to say, this is the unchangeable law of justice and of love, the direct expression of the fundamental unity of all beings. Thus, whoever attains the first illuminations must share them with others. One of the most effective ways of doing this is by pouring out upon them our own joy, which is the joie de vivre, the joy of life. It's not like saying, hey, I feel good, I'm sorry you feel bad, and trying to cheer them up by beaming on them. It's actually allowing life to show up through you as a joyful presence. Joy is a presence. And so he's basically saying, when that happens, don't keep it for yourself. Spread it, but you don't spread it in a way to aggrandize yourself. Say, look at me, I'm really shining and I'm feeling good. And I have pity for you because you're feeling bad. It's not done out of pity, it's done out of love.
Right.
We share our treasures with each other because that's how we support each other.
Yeah, and it really does have the power to transmute. One person seated in joy in their work can transform an entire group, entire city, entire nation. You can, it's when you are seated in that place of the joyous work of the spiritual great work.
Well, for me, joy gives lift to our wings. It's like I was watching the red-tailed hawk yesterday, circling here above Meditation Mount.
Yeah.
And it does that all year round, but particularly now when the thermals are, the heat's here, and it just glides on these thermals and circles. You realize that it's rising on these thermals. It's being lifted. And so these waves of joy lift us, and they actually give us strength because they allow us to be filled with life. And we naturally receive the strength of life. So joy is a source of strength. It's not just of feeling good. This is beyond feeling good. This is being in touch with life, and life being in touch with us, or life touching through us and touching the world through us. It's different. It goes back to your statement at the beginning of the podcast. It's a state of being. It's a presence.
Yeah.
So if you go to the Agni Yoga teaching, they have hundreds and hundreds of slokas on joy, because it's one of the key words in Agni Yoga. Let me just pull out a couple. There's one from Fiery World 1, Book 1, and it's sloka 663. How can one attain success? Remember, through joy, not through despair, but joy. Do not for an instant believe that we ponder the probability or improbability of success. The thought is, does your joy suffice to quicken the ascent? We always counsel joy. It is necessary to realize and remember that you have succeeded when you rejoiced. Certainly, this is not the frisking of a calf on the meadow, but the creative joy which transforms all difficulties. The play of the mother of the world is in joy. She enfolds the enlightened ones in her veil of joy. Rejoice amidst flowers, and in the midst of snow, equally redolent, also rejoice. I mean, these are some sort of old-fashioned words, but the power of it's like joy. You can't live without joy. You can't live without oxygen. You can't live without blood. Joy is a spiritual nutrient. It's part of as we said, when you are joyful, it actually oxygenates the blood. It changes the chemistry of the blood. When a joyful person and a person in despair have different blood chemistry.
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing more and more, actually, more science behind that too.
Yeah.
And that's something that's becoming, it was, I guess, theoretical, alchemical for a long time. It's something maybe you had to take on faith, but there's a lot of good research that's been going on that really lends a lot of sort of scientific weight to that.
It does. It really does, because energy follows thought. And if the thought coming through us is conveying this presence of joy, it will have a chemical equivalent. It will have an energetic equivalent, a psychoenergetic equivalent. It will change the atmosphere.
Right.
If I go into a room and I'm really low, feeling down, I'm filled with even hatred, I can bring the atmosphere of that room down in a second.
Yeah.
Now, somebody walks into a room and smiles, not just smiles on the surface, but really smiles as a release of some inner joy.
Yeah.
It changes everything.
It sure does.
I remember back in 1970, the first time I met Roberto Assagioli. I met him in the south of England. And what struck me was this joy. I looked into his eyes and they were twinkling, they were sparkling. And it was like this radiance of joy. And I knew that he'd also had an incredibly tough life, a productive life, but he'd lost a son, so he'd lost a child. He'd been imprisoned by the fascists in Italy during the Second World War. He'd gone through a hell of a lot of stuff. And yet he'd reached a point where he was now in resonant relationship with a state of being, which was joyful. So joy naturally poured through him.
Yeah.
And it was in his warmth of his embrace, his words, but his eyes, like if eyes are the window of the soul, you could see the joy of his soul sparkling. That was my first impression of him. It was very deep. And that's when I realized, I finally met smiling wisdom. This is what joy looks like and feels like.
Yeah.
So it was a very powerful imprinting in my early 20s. So one more possible quote we could take from Agni Yoga, Joey, before we continue finding other doorways to open. This is taken from the Agni Yoga book called Hierarchy. It's sloka 96. It says, Be, be, be joyous, not through desire, but through the striving of spirit. Be joyous not through ancestral desires, but through the command of the entire consciousness, in order to create that luminous thread which unites all worlds. Be joyous not because of the success of works already decayed, but in knowledge of the predestined and of that already inscribed in the scrolls of the future. Be joyous not in the desire for repose, but because of the agitation of the elements, since only the agitation of the elements will serve you, for one cannot command the dead to revivify the living. Thus, understand that joy is a special wisdom, and do not abandon the fires of light above the crumbs of the feast. That's like a powerful statement.
I find it fascinating and also interesting the way joy is sort of, in the Agni Yoga tradition, joy is like this fiery energy.
Yeah.
And I think that's, to me, that's a concept of fiery energy that really resonates. Like sometimes it can be a little vague and a little like hard to pin down, but that's something that is ultra specific, because when you're in that state of joy, you have that fiery energy is present.
I love that. Okay, let's take that, Joey. Okay, so where does fire live safely? In a fireplace.
Right.
What is the natural fireplace inside the human system? It's the heart.
Right.
So I believe that you can only contain and circulate the fire of joy, the fire of love, the fire of compassion, the fire of daring. All of these things require a hearth, a fireplace, which is the open, loving, compassionate heart. That's why this is not a concept. So joy can only flow through an open heart, one that is united, where all the luminous threads unite all the worlds, as it just said in that sloka. So I think this is a really important point you're making. It is a fiery presence. So you because Agni Yoga, Agni means fire, it uses a lot of fiery words like daring. We talked about daring before. It's a fiery striving.
Right.
And I used to affirm each day about striving, and then I realized it was missing a quality. So I added a word. So when I make an affirmation now, my affirmation is to strive joyfully. Joyful striving. I changed it from just striving to joyful striving about 4 years ago because it was just this hard-edged striving. It didn't contain that fire that you just described of joy.
That's a big difference. That changes that whole concept. And in terms of marching orders, it's quite a different perspective. And I like that, the joyful striving.
Because otherwise striving is, okay, it brings out the hard edge. Well, it brings out the will.
Yeah.
And will is very direct, powerful, no nonsense. Let's go there. But will, as we've said before, is the way that life opens up a space for love to enter. Will is not in opposition to love. Will is that direct, determined, intentional focus to create an opening for love to show up. And with that, when you open that portal for love, you get all the other fires along with it. Joy. Hope.
Yeah.
So when I look at the state of the world now, a lot of people can say, how dare you be joyful when there's so much suffering around?
I think that's it. You have to dare.
That's how we started this broadcast, Joey.
Yeah.
And the answer is, but it's that which lifts it.
Yeah. Because it's a beacon of hope. Joy is a beacon of hope. And if you're not going to light that fire, then what's the point of even getting out of bed?
Okay, I love that image of beacon
Yeah.
of hope. Let me take that down to a very, very concrete example
Okay.
that just flashed into my mind. During the Second World War, in Britain, there was a lot of fog in the south of England, and they had airfields that were fogged in, and it was stopping the landing and takeoff of fighter jets. And so somebody came up with this very simple solution. Down the runway, every few yards, on either side of the runway, they'd light these metal bins. They put fuel inside, they light it. So they were flaming cylinders, and the heat lifted the fog.
Oh, right.
So how they dispersed the fog on the runways was to light these fires of hope, just as you described it.
Right.
And I thought, well, that is a great example and an analogy, actually, of how do we lift the clouds that are currently covering up the earth and stopping us see the sun and stopping us land and take off as we need to. We got to light some fires, Joey.
That's right.
And a lot of people, when they light the fires, they're the fires of destruction. They set fire to. It was like the riots now in the southwest of England over the killing of the three children. It's the usual thing. You set fire to police cars, you set fire to things, you set fire. So you use fire as a way of expressing your contempt or hatred or whatever. But fire, as we said before, is neutral. Fire is fire. Fire will burn everything except itself. But the deepest fire is the fire of love, the fire of hope, and the fire of joy. I think we got a new trinity here, Joey.
Yeah, we do. Yeah, it's a declaration of freedom as well. Joy is.
Say more.
It's you really are. You're declaring that these constraints of the material world are not going to affect your interior world. And so I think I like that. If you look at some of the saints and sages, often they had a deep sense of joy, even in the face of martyrdom. So. And then you try to imagine that, try to put yourself in their shoes, trying to, what would I do in that situation? How would I would have reacted? And then you realize when you achieve that state of joy, and by achieving it, you live it. It's deeply ingrained in you. But it is that declaration of freedom from freedom from dogma, everything.
Because no one can imprison you. Nobody really can kill you. They may take away your earthly vehicle.
Right.
As you were speaking, I was thinking, God, what would it be like to be burnt at the stake in the Middle Ages?
Exactly. And so many of them still wouldn't repent or recant,
Well, because they knew that they were standing in the fire of truth. And therefore, that fire is a safeguard against everything. It's, wow. One of the things we've seemed to have forgotten is that joy allows the soul of humanity to sing.
Right.
Because at the moment, we're not singing. The soul of our humanity is not singing. We got a lot of wailing going on.
There is a lot of wailing.
And understandably so.
Yeah.
A wailing and a gnashing of teeth.
Yeah, and within a context that's kind of an embarrassment of riches, it's a little bit hard. Sometimes it's kind of hard to be like, well, people complain about how things are, but it's also kind of the best time. This is the best time in human history to live. We have the best medicine, we have the best resources, we have the cleanest water, we have the most food. It's like we're not necessarily doing the best at spreading those around. But in terms of human history, there's never been less people in poverty. There's never been, so in the backdrop of this literal embarrassment of riches, sometimes we tend to moan and whine a little bit, whinge a little bit too much, as they say.
But the embarrassment of riches doesn't call forth the joy of the soul.
No, it doesn't.
It alleviates the pain of not having. So I said that was my final Agni Yoga quote. Do you mind if I?
Oh, please. Yeah.
Because it just reminded me of there's a legend that's told in one of the books, and this comes from New Era Community, and it's Sloka 162. Sounds like I'm quoting the Bible, chapter and verse. So if anyone wants to go look it up, they can.
Yes, of course.
So this is New Era Community, Sloka 162. It's a story, so listen. Once, according to an old legend, there came a messenger from a distant world to give people equality, brotherhood, and joy. Long since had people forgotten their songs. They remained in a stupor of hate. The messenger banished darkness and crowdedness, smote infection, and instituted joyful labor. Hatred was stilled, and the sword of the messenger remained on the wall. But all were silent and knew not how to begin singing. Then the messenger assembled the little children, led them into the woods, and said to them, "These are your flowers, your brooks, your trees. No one has followed us. I shall rest, and you fill yourselves with joy." Thereupon, timidly, they ventured into the forest. At last the littlest one came to a meadow and sighted a ray of the sun. Then a yellow oriole sounded its call. The little one followed it, whispering, and soon joyously he sang out, "The sun is ours." One by one the children gathered upon the meadow, and a new hymn to light rang out. And the messenger said, "Humanity has again begun to sing. Come is the date."
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, it's one thing to have enough food and have enough shelter and cease wars, but what is it that's being called forth? The song of the soul, the joy of life, the joie de vivre, the joy of living, expresses through our song, our relationships, not just with each other, but with all of life. And so for me, this sloka really says, we've got to be like little children again. We've got to find the song of our soul, the natural, graceful, gracious state of being that is joy, the innocent joy of a child. Because innocent meaning is not mentally calculated. It's not a result of thinking. It's a result of being.
Right. It's also a unifying force in that sense. You know, joy can take all this disparate kind of people or ideas or concepts and unify them in the joyous work of a unified goal. You know, and like that's the joy that pervades that work. Seems to produce more energy than the sum of its parts. You know?
Well, it's infectious. Joy is infectious.
Yeah.
Hatred is infectious.
Both, yeah.
A lot of the energy, once it gets a response from somewhere, spreads like a virus.
Yeah.
But joy is infectious.
Yeah.
We talk about infectious diseases. This is an infectious ease, not an infectious disease. I haven't thought of that before. Joy is an infectious ease.
Yeah, that's transformative.
Hatred is an infectious disease.
Yeah. Yeah, that's I like that.
So
that's interesting opposites or opposing forces.
Right. So so it really is, for most people now, is understanding and resolving this conundrum of pain and joy coexisting inside the same temporal arc of history at this time. So how do we remain joyful, positive, undeterred by the implosions and perturbations of our society and upheaval? It is not just putting on a brave face. It's not putting on a brave face. It's opening the heart and being fully engaged in life so that joy can flow through. And joy uplifts not just us, but everything around, which is the whole thing of spiritual joy that Roberto Jolie mentioned. When you have something, you've got to give it away. You've got to offer it. because we're here to be part of the great circulation of blessing, the great chain of being. And joy is one of the nutrients in the great chain of being.
Mm. Yeah, it is. I think that's an important line what you just said. The idea of nutrients. We often go back to gardening here as a metaphor, as an allegory, and that is the great, like fertilizer. That's the miracle grow.
It is miracle. I love that. Yeah.
I was just thinking like it's always so interesting because Kelly just put some miracle grow on some of the plants that are outside of our apartment, and just in a matter of days, it just completely transformed. They're all super green, and they're lush, and and you give something what it needs to grow and to do its work. So you give the plant what it needs to do its work of being a plant, growing, having flowers, propagating. Well, you give the soul, give your spirit the nutrients, the fertilizer it needs to do its joyous work,
Well, exactly. And when I was learning organic farming from this old farmer up in the west of Sweden in the early 1970s, he was very clear. He said, I can tell who's looking after what part of the garden.
Okay.
By the way it's growing, its radiance, its vibes, its energy.
Mm-hmm.
Because the state of being of the person reflects and influences the state of the garden.
All right.
And so I think we may have named this in a podcast about 3 years ago when we were doing soul gardening.
Yeah.
But we did this experiment in 1971. We divided a piece of our land in two, and we planted potatoes. One half, the potatoes, I would spend each day paying attention to them, stroking their leaves, giving them lots of love, etc., etc.
Mm-hmm.
And the other I ignored. I didn't send bad thoughts to them. I just ignored. I just left it. And then after a couple of months, we noticed the difference between the two halves. The half that I'd given the attention to, the leaves were darker green. They had sort of somehow absorbed more nitrates from the soil. They were healthier. And where I had ignored, not that nature can't grow by itself, but it was lacking the ingredient and the element that you just described that the other half had been given, which was my attention, my love, my blessing, my joy. And at the end of that experiment, this was an experiment, Anders, the farmer, and I, we concluded that the state of consciousness of a human being affects the natural outcome of all growth in nature. So we are part of the garden. If we're not a gardener and actually don't do the gardening, but walk through a garden with joy, we are actually fertilizing the garden.
Mm-hmm.
It is the miracle grow of the heart. But I remember that vividly. It's over 50 years ago, but it's like, wow, we've just scientifically proved this.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you see that. I mean, it's so obvious. But it's unfortunate they had the one experiment about whether they were picking up babies or not, and the ones that weren't held and picked up were despondent. They did not develop the same.
Exactly. But I think the main thing is in despondency we let go of everything.
Mm-hmm.
Meaning, belonging, sense. Nothing makes sense anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's essential that we remember that our lives are neither petty nor meaningless.
That's very important.
If we can hold this vision, I know it's difficult to when you're sort of snowed under and with daily stuff, but if we can hold the vision that we are cosmic in scope, and despite all the daily indications to the contrary, each one is a vital aspect of life and part of the grand outworking of this plan or project called life. And if we don't grow and express the beauty and the truth and the goodness that lives inside of us, the Garden of Gaia will be missing a color, a fragrance, a beauty that only we can bring. Therefore, joy is needed so that every human soul can flower. Because when the whole of the human family flowers, that is joy beyond description. That's joy expressed in, well, it's a sort of a spiritual ecstasy.
Mm-hmm. That's so important because if you, that is like the one place you can really show that every person is important, because it doesn't matter what you're doing, if you, or what you've done or where you're at, if you can embody joy, if you can invite joy into your life, if you can create that hearth that can hold that fire, I mean, you just glow. And it doesn't matter if you're a homeless person or you're the president or you're the, just the person working at the grocery store. If you can, that joy is contagious, and it really is a beacon, and like.
I think you just named it as well, the person at the grocery store. There's often, you get a lot of people who are volunteer or they're seniors and they help out at grocery stores and pack the bags.
Yeah.
And there's one particular woman who packs bags who's got a wonderful smile, is very joyful and upbeat. And you can see how people, if they're not quite there, by the time they've gone through the cashier and had her help bag their groceries, she's transmitted something.
Yeah.
It's infectious. Suddenly there was a lift. And so the checkout line could be really where you do that final magical touch.
Yeah.
And so I've seen that.
Yeah.
And so that could be an incredibly useful gift of, hey, I think I'll go and bag groceries and just be a source of joy and positively infect the people that comes through the store.
I like that. Or taking that paradigm and putting it out into the world. I was trying to imagine what joyous driving would be. How do you joyously navigate traffic in Southern California? How can we be in our practice?
Well, okay, this is what immediately comes to me.
Yeah.
I would look around and say, I'm driving down this freeway with all my sisters and brothers in California. And then I go, wow, California, here are the beautiful hills. Oh, we're on this beautiful planet. Then I look up in the sky and go, oh, I'm also driving through the cosmos.
Yeah.
I am driving through the cosmos. Oh my God. And the cosmos is contained by who knows what.
Yeah.
So what I found that when I want to get out of my hole, I have to expand not just my consciousness, but my heart, but my appreciation, my gratitude. And so it's something like that. When I contract, that's when things get bad.
Yeah.
My heart sort of shrinks.
I mean, gratitude is almost the hearth in which joy can sit into as well.
It is.
When you expand your ability to be in the state of gratitude, it allows joy to flow in. Yeah.
I've used this phrase before. For me, gratitude is how we say yes and thank you to life. And when we say yes and thank you and have this sense of gratitude, it opens up a space for grace. And inside that space for grace, that's the hearth in which the fire of love, the fire of joy, the fire of hope can burn.
Yeah.
It's that triple fire again.
Yeah, I love the concept, the state of grace. That's an important one for me. And I was just, when you were saying that, I was just thinking how important that joy is as a component of grace,
Well, it was interesting back in 2009 in January when we inaugurated the International Garden of Peace. We had a ceremony, we stood around, we invoked the spirit of peace, and then we called upon a designated speaker, somebody who we wanted to open the garden on our behalf. This was Robert Mueller, who was the former Assistant Secretary General of the United Nations. And most people were expecting him to say a few words. Talk about peace, talk about this. He got up, he smiled, he reached into his back pocket, he poured out a harmonica, and he played Beethoven's Ode to Joy. And then he sat down. that was it.
Yeah.
Nothing else need to be said or done. I mean, how could you top that? No words could have topped the energy brought through by him playing Ode to Joy from the heart On a harmonica inside the Garden of Peace with about 80 people there.
Yeah.
I mean, what a way to open that space.
Yeah, and there is something too about certain types of music, certain phrases, certain keys, certain runs of notes are able to embody and create a sense of joy. You know, and it's a real thing in the same way. In the same way, a dissonant chord can sort of almost like feel the weight in your chest come down. You know, the uplifting power of a beautiful phrase of music is almost unmatched. You know.
Well, that's why music opens up a space that allows us to touch the corresponding sacred geometry of life.
Mm-hmm.
It is a portal, and then it opens up, and the strings of our heart are touched, and they start to resonate. The sympathetic strings of our heart resonate to the note of the cosmos. That's the whole thing of how do we become joyful musicians of the sacred music of the spheres.
Right, because you're allowing yourself to have the the resonance, the vibratory resonance of a higher chord, a higher frequency.
Right, and I always find a way of bringing in St. Francis. So once again,
yes,
Lord, make me an instrument of thy peace.
Yeah, absolutely. You're playing you become the instrument in which the cosmos plays out. It's it's opera.
Life is playing itself out through us.
Yeah.
We're in the play.
Mm-hmm.
We are the playing out.
Yeah.
The outplaying.
Yeah.
And joy is not just a special wisdom, but I think joy is it's the ode to joy. The celebration of life is an ode to joy.
Mm.
Because you could celebrate life by lots of things, but when you come together and are joyful, you're not just celebrating life as an external something.
Mm-hmm.
You're allowing life to celebrate itself through you,
right,
and through a community of people who are in joy, joyful community.
Mm-hmm.
Which for me is what beloved community is. Martin Luther King's beloved community is a community rooted in compassion and caring, rooted in joy.
Yeah.
So this is, it's a tough one for some people to be open to receiving.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Because you get that's all well and good for you, but.
Yeah.
And then you say, but this is not, we have to wait until the clouds have gone, then we can be joyful. No, joy is the natural pre-existing condition that has been temporarily obscured by the clouds. Let's remove the clouds, not the joy.
Right.
And guess what? Joy is that source of heartfelt heat that disperses the clouds, that lifts the fog. Like this morning when I woke up, the marine layer had come in and covered the valley. Because here at Meditation Mount, we're about 1,400 feet, and we look down and there's a marine layer, and sometimes it comes up and it kisses the foot of the mount. Mm-hmm. And then it goes back down. So the people in the valley are living in the fog. Mm-hmm. The people on the mountain are living in the sort of the joyful air of a new dawn, if I can be wax poetic. But I always look at that as like, imagine if I was living in the valley, not it's better than or worse than, but it means that I have to remember when I'm in the valley and enshrouded in the mist, that's not a permanent state.
Mm. That's important.
But joy is a permanent state.
Yeah.
It's a permanent inner state because it is life itself celebrating.
Mm. Yeah.
It's the exuberance and effervescence of life.
It's like, it's a joyful heart being the vessel for grace. And I think attaining that state of grace is such an important and beautiful concept and North Star, if you will.
And we do all of this not to be better than or brighter than or holier than. Yeah. This is because this is the call of life.
Yeah. Yeah, this is one of those things, it's truly an internal journey. This is
Yeah.
not. This is not the idea of comparison. The idea of metrics. All those. That's completely irrelevant here. This is something that is heart centered and deeply personal.
So, Joey, on
Yeah.
a scale of 1 to 10, how joyful are you now? Wrong question.
Would you say you are strongly joyful, less joyful?
I mean, you can't do surveys on joy.
No, you can't.
Joy is that which pervades and surveys life itself. You can't analyze joy.
Mm-mm.
It's a presence.
Yeah.
It can be experienced, not analyzed.
Yeah.
So, what else is? I don't have a harmonica, and so I can't play "Ode to Joy" now. It's sort of okay. Let's conclude with "Ode to Joy," but I mean, we could sing it, but
yeah. Maybe I can try to find a copyright-free version to play on the outro. Yeah.
Yeah. So, what are some final thoughts that you have on joy, Joey?
I mean, to me, what it comes down to is this idea with like the joyful surrender to the divine, and you can define divine by what that's not a term that's supposed to in any way make anyone turn or have a reaction to, but the joyful surrender to the beauty, the mystery, the awe of what is,
Wow. I love that, because joyful surrender is not holding anything back. It's not saying, I'm going to let this in, but not that.
Yeah. Yeah, let it all in.
Let it all in.
Yeah.
And then you become all in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I love that. Joyful surrender. It's like joyful striving. If I think about surrender, it's martyrdom in the old Middle Age sense of the word, of the medieval martyrs.
Right.
Or the early Christian martyrs. There was a lot of suffering. No, there was suffering on the outside, but there was joy on the inside.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, for me, that's kind of what this, how this sort of wraps up into that joyful surrender, because I found that like for me, even the joyful striving is that's something when I'm doing an action, but for the joyful surrender is where I have to be first before I can do anything else.
Right. In order for life to move through me, I have to surrender to life.
Yeah. Yeah, and for me that was actually it was a specific moment, moments in time, which was a sea change in the way that my life was going. It was before that and now after it. So the BC AD changeover.
So can you go back and remember in your bones that moment, and can you recall the feeling and sensation of that?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
So does it work if you're despondent to go back and recall your cellular memory of that time?
It does. And it's interesting you say that, because that is one of the ways that I sort of walk myself back off the ledge in times of strife or struggle and recenter myself. I go back and go through those processes and go through those moments. And it does. I mean, it's one of those things. It's like once you've had those kind of transformational moments, they are transformational because of the deep power, and they continue to resonate.
Well, they're indelibly imprinted.
Absolutely.
In the atomic structure of your DNA, your whole being.
Yeah.
And therefore, we talk about cellular memory.
Yeah.
But it's
like an epigenetic like signpost. From this point on, it was different.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Wow. Let joy fill the world. Let peace prevail on earth. Let joy prevail on earth.
Yeah.
I think that's it. We have a peace pole.
That's right.
I guess we have to be the joy poles.
Yeah, we'll work on that. We'll work on a good branding term for that. But yeah, we are. First, you are the lighted heart. You are the lighthouse. You are the beacon of joy and hope and grace. And this is a practice that is a daily practice. Like the lighthouse has to light the light each night. You have to kindle that fire in your heart every day.
And it isn't as though, I've run out of joy. No, joy is an endless, infinite presence we have to open the door to let it in. And the door is the portal of the heart.
That's right.
So may joy flood through the heart of humanity and transform our world
Yeah.
and lift us on the wings of love and peace. I mean,
Amen to that.
joy to all beings.
That's
North,
right.
south, east, west,
Oh, I love that.
above, below, joy to all beings.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Joey.
All right.